In this video, I'm going to show you how I use Inkscape to create the Zentangle Knightsbridge. As with all projects, or I should say most projects, I start by setting my document properties. I click File, Document Properties to open up the Document Properties dialog box. So a couple of things you should notice here. In the default units field, I select px for pixels. You can select whatever unit of measure you want. In the units field, I also select px for pixels, and again, you can select whatever unit of measure you want. In the width field, I enter 800, and in the height field, I enter 800. On this Page tab, for all of the remaining fields, I accept the defaults. I want to create a grid, so I click the Grids tab. Grids are useful for placing items or objects that you create in a specific place on your page, and also for sizing objects. So I'm going to click New to create a grid, and then in the Spacing X field, I'm going to type 20. And in the Spacing Y field, I'm going to type 20. And that creates these small blocks here, and they'll be 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels high. A major grid line is nothing more than a darker line, as you see here. I'm going to change the major grid line every field to 5. So now I have these small squares that are each 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels high, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then a major grid line, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and another major grid line. So 5 times 20 is 100. So each of these larger squares or major grid blocks are 100 pixels. And as I said before, each of the smaller squares are 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels wide. I'm 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels high. I'm going to close my Document Properties dialog box. And then I'm going to click the Zoom to Fit Page in Window icon so that my page, which you remember is 800 pixels by 800 pixels, fits nicely in my window. I want to create a square that is 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels high. So I'm going to click the rectangle tool to select it, and then I'm going to click up here in this upper corner, hold down the Control key, and drag diagonally until I get to this bottom corner. And that's going to create a square 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels high. Now I have my preferences set so that whenever I use the rectangle tool, it creates a square or a rectangle that has a stroke, and that's the outline here, that is 2 pixels wide and no fill. Yours is probably set differently, particularly if you haven't changed the default. What I have to do And what you need to do also, if you want to change your fill to black, is to click the color black right here. So that changes my fill to black. Now, if your stroke or the outline that you have is not black, you'll need to change the stroke to black. And you'll do that by holding down the Shift key and clicking the color black. Alright, so now we have our square, and what I want to do is duplicate it. But before I do that, I have to select it, so I'll just click the selector tool, and that selects the square. To duplicate it, I click Edit, Duplicate, and Inkscape duplicates it. It's difficult to see because whenever Inkscape creates a duplicate, it places the duplicate directly on top of the original. I want my duplicate to be catty-corner to the original, and basically to fill up this major grid block right here. So I'm going to click on the square and drag it so it's right there and let it go. So now I have my two squares, and I'm going to use this as the basis for my Knightsbridge. But I need to group these two blocks. And to group them, since I already have my selector tool selected, all I have to do is click and drag around them. Grouping allows you to work with one or more objects as if there were one. And actually, I didn't just group them, I just selected them. To group them, once they're selected, I have to click Object, Object, Group, and now they're grouped. So now I can work with these two squares as if they were one object. I need to do that, I need to work with them as if they're one object because Inkscape has a feature called cloning. And basically what cloning is it allows you to take an object and make a copy of it. And whenever you make a change to the original, the copy will also be changed. But Inkscape also has a feature called tiled clones, and that allows you to create matrices or rows and columns of an object. And creating rows and columns will allow us to easily create our Knightsbridge. So in order to create a matrix, we're going to have to use the clone tiles feature. So we'll just click Edit, Clone, Create Tiled Clones. Alright. We want our matrix to be 4 rows by 4 columns. But before we get to that, I want to point out something to you. I'm using up here simple translation. So that's the default, and that's what we're going to stick with. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click the reset button. That clears out any settings that I made previously on the shift, scale, rotation, any of these other tabs up here. So you'll always want to click reset so that any other settings you use previously in creating your last tiled clone don't carry over to your new one. Alright, so as I said before, we want 4 rows, so I'm gonna put 4 in this field, and we want 4 columns. So I'm going to type 4 in this field, and then I'm going to click Create, and that creates our, wait a minute, close this box, and as you can see, that creates our Knightsbridge, nice matrix of 4 by 4. If you wanted it larger, you could add more rows or columns, whichever you need more of, or both.